My name is Brennan. I'm a technical marketing engineer with Cisco on the Meraki Switching product management team. It's a mouthful even in the Saskatchewan ease. Excited to be here with you guys today, talk a little bit about how we're powering some more possibilities with a whole bunch of new Meraki switches. I'm going to talk about 3 whole new products today. Technically, one of them is not totally new, but I'll explain, right? And at Meraki, if you've spent any time with us, you know we kind of like to talk about the cloud. This is probably not much of a surprise, but we talk about the benefits of the cloud. And as part of Cisco now for several years, we've also now been talking for a while about this idea of a unified experience in the cloud, right? And on the cloud side, especially on Meraki, this is kind of about those things we've become known for, the Meraki magic, right? The reduced downtime, efficiency savings, that zero-touch provisioning kind of experience, right? And so we're thinking now more and sharing our story, our vision really about the evolution of the Cisco switching experience as a whole, right? So Cisco and Meraki, not so much separate entities anymore. We really spend a lot of time, and you'll see examples of this working together more and more as time goes on. So today, the first thing we're going to talk about is how we're bringing the Catalyst switching more kind of into the Meraki experience. We're a little ways along on this journey, right? We've had this idea now of a while about being able to migrate some Catalyst switches. So the idea you've already got a Catalyst switch, you're still using your console cable or bootstrapping that device yourself, but converting it into a Meraki mode and making it manageable in the Meraki dashboard because you see great things there as well. Today, though, we're thinking more about that day 0, maybe even day 1 experience, right? This is kind of the piece that's missing, right? Getting away from the console cable together, going to that Meraki experience of not having to, roll a truck with a skilled technician to a site and just waiting for that device to come up online. So in that vein, I'm excited to start talking today about, we're waiting for the slide to advance. There we go, okay. This is the Catalyst Meraki 9300 because we just like making things longer as we go. We call it the CM 9300. No, actually, what I was referring to this is you'll hear M mode or -M SKUs, right? So 9300M for Meraki, if that wasn't clear. Okay, so on all the products we're talking about today, this is kind of we're calling it the demanding use cases. Really, this is for those customers who love and know Catalyst switching. Like a lot of us grew up on Catalyst switching. I grew up on Catalyst switching. And they rely on it for their most demanding use cases. And they really want to kind of stick with that platform they know and love. But they want the Meraki experience, right? And to be clear, this 9300M is about the day 0 experience. This is about being able to order a Catalyst 9300 switch in Meraki mode straight from Cisco. So the ability that you're going to get a serial number, a Meraki serial number, pardon me, right at the time that we ship that order, and you're going to be able to start configuring that switch before you've even got it in hand. No console cable required. We have a great unboxing video on our website from one of my colleagues, Nico, who tosses the console cable aside. A nice effect. And so this joins the kind of migration experience for the 9300 where you can convert one if you've got one on hand already. You can convert it back if you want to switch roles after a while. But now you can actually order these switches straight from us in Meraki mode right off the bat and kind of get that full experience from start to finish, okay? So if we take a little bit of a look at this, again, this is that marriage of the simplicity and the scalability of the Meraki dashboard, but a whole new level of flexibility for Catalyst 9300 and really us kind of saying, yes, we'll take that, thank you. There's no point in us building that entire portfolio of really robust hardware. We'd like to leverage the benefits of it on the Meraki side as well. So this brings to us, okay, so things like modular uplinks. We had that before with the MS390, but it was kind of the only platform. And again, rather than reinventing the wheel over and over, we're saying, hey, we have a whole bunch of switches here that people really love. Let's take those modular uplinks, that incredible range of MGig options, right? The ability to do adaptive policy. We're talking about UPOE, all of the great things about the Catalyst 9300 line everybody loves. And bring them into the Meraki dashboard, and our portfolio has suddenly doubled overnight, effectively, right? So this is what it looks like. This is kind of the eye chart here as we get on the stream to the slide with all of the models. Okay, so gigabit models and the multi-gig models are what we're starting with here, okay? These are going to start shipping in mid-November. They're, I believe, orderable now. right? And so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Actually, it's 10 models of 9300 switches, all orderable in Meraki mode straight from us to start. Okay, so the gigabit and mgig models there you see on the screen. Following those, a little later, early 24 is when we expect to start shipping the fiber aggregation models as well. So those are, by the way, of course, migratable now. So again, if you have one sitting around and you love them and use them, you can totally either get them monitored by the Meraki dashboard and still leverage everything the iOS XE can do, or convert them into Meraki mode and manage them while you're waiting for us to ship them straight to you in that mode right off the bat.
I was going to say the 9300X non-fiber aggregation is not up there. Is that intentional on y'all's part?
It's a good question. I might defer that one, Alex, if you can. Do you know offhand what we're doing with the 9300X?
So there's the copper version of that can run like all 10 gig on?
Yeah, the HX.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, what you'll see here, maybe the overall theme is we got to start somewhere. And hey, man, like MS390, we've got migration now. We're adding like 10 new models of switches plus 4 more later. Like we are getting there, but holy moly, it's one thing at a time. Okay. Long story short is, hopefully you're starting to see us pick up the pace a little bit here, and then more and more is going to become available over time.
Sorry, question.
Yes.
So when you say convert Catalyst switch into Meraki, what does that mean? A code upgrade? Just enabling things?
Yeah, great question, by the way. Thank you for that. All of the Catalyst switches, even in Meraki mode, are still running iOS XE, right? Okay. There's, I know it's a little bit different on the wireless side with how like the personas are switched. We're running the same code the whole time. It's really about getting it connected to Meraki dashboard in a way that we can support all of the Meraki features that the Catalyst can do. So obviously there's some limitations there in what the Catalyst can do because we can't do things in dashboard like say I want to configure VRFs. Mm-hmm. For those cases, things like cloud monitoring is maybe a better use case for you, where you can still have the switch in the Meraki dashboard and monitor it, but have full access to the CLI to leverage the everything in the kitchen sink that iOS XE can do. If you're converting into Meraki mode, it's really going to behave exactly like any other Meraki switch, right? So the zero-touch provisioning comes with that. You configure it completely in dashboard. There is no more access to the CLI at that stage.
Okay.
Makes sense?
I have something as well. This is Tim Bertino.
Hey, Tim.
I think the first potential gasp moment for customers is, okay, I'm seeing all of these Catalyst switches being brought into the Meraki portfolio.
Yeah.
What is that going to do to my true Meraki platform? And I think we know the answer that it's just a different use case. So what is that use case for the Catalyst platform being brought into the Meraki
That's
portfolio?
a great question. And I'll say it's almost like I thought about that one ahead of time because it's coming up in a couple of slides. If you can hang tight for me as well, we'll talk about that as well. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the Catalyst 9300 again here, but what I want to show you guys is that all of the bits and pieces that come with the 9300 series of accessories now, are supported in dashboard as well. So again, hopefully what you're seeing here is a whole bunch of new flexibility and options really to get the Meraki experience with way more hardware than we had before. So things like those uplink modules, all of the Cisco optics and stack cables now supported in dashboard alongside the Catalyst 9300. Okay, I think this is kind of cool. I mentioned earlier the mgig density on the Catalyst 9300. We have a couple of mgig platforms, already native Meraki switches, but now we have a whole nother level of, right? So the highest mgig density really in the industry, you can get over 400 ports and an 8-member stack, switch now manageable in the Meraki dashboard. It's pretty cool, right? This is really where we're starting to see the benefits of leveraging the Cisco portfolio. They have an incredible hardware legacy, right? And we've been asked for years as well, besides the fact of like, oh my gosh, is anybody killing Meraki switching? No. But we are going to absolutely take advantage of things like this.
And is the power stacking available in Meraki as well?
Absolutely. So we've had it with the MS390 for a while. We do stack power redundancy, and that is absolutely supported here as well.
Yeah, that's Lindsay Hill. It's quite good to see on the density on the multi-gig there. Like I've got a use case, or a lot of the multi-gig switches that are out there, they're like, oh, well, you've still got all your desktops at 1 gig, but you need a few multi-gig ports for your APs. I'm like, no, I kind of just want multi-gig to my desktops. And like for wireless is actually not for my network, wireless is not that important. It's
Right.
not that big a deal. Most of my users are hardwired, and I want them connected at multi-gig.
Yeah.
And the density on typical other platforms is just not great. So it's quite nice to see these sort
I'm
of.
glad to hear it. That's great. I appreciate that feedback as well. Yeah, we really are seeing similar things, right? Multi-gig is a multi, use case technology, and as it's been available for a while, there's more than just the wireless use case. Right?
But that's kind of been where everyone's just pushing it. Oh, it's just for your APs. Your APs is like, well, I've got a bunch of users moving massive amounts of data around,
Absolutely.
and I'd quite like to get them at 2.5, 5 gig, 10 gig to those.
We are seeing that more often as well. So I'm guilty as well. I'm trying to think ahead in my presentation now and say, I don't think I'm, pigeonholing MGig as a Wi-Fi primary, technology in the rest of the presentation, but I could be wrong.
But wait, did I leave that slide in?
I do know exactly what you're talking about. We have lots of users talking to us as well. Like I've got an MGig dock for my laptop at my desk now, and it's just always still, sometimes more reassuring to put on the wire. I do the same thing, Apple TVs at home. It's like if I can wire them, I prefer to. There's so many potential use cases there for MGig as well. So appreciate it. Finally, on the Catalyst 9300 here, I'll talk about some of the features we have in dashboard. In this case, it's adaptive policy, group policy, ASL, some more security features. Up until now, this has really been a feature for the MS390s, in particular for adaptive policy, right? So this is our implementation of Cisco's TrustSec architecture, right? Microsegmentation, and it is TrustSec, to be clear, if you're not familiar. This interoperates 100% with Cisco's implementation on the rest of the Catalyst portfolio with ICE. It's just the way we kind of present and allow you to configure and stand it up in dashboard. And the limitation we had so far was that the MS390 was the only platform with the hardware in it, and able to read those SGT tags and enforce the policy. And so now, again, we've got this whole nother slew of hardware to enable adaptive policy use cases everywhere, right? And obviously, those sorts of things are really important to have anywhere you have ports or access layer needs to be able to read those tags and enforce them for you.
And is that enforcement the same as traditional Catalyst? Is it's at egress?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I know Alex later will tell you all about some really great adaptive policy use cases. Think about your hard questions, absolutely, for Alex, because he is absolutely an expert on technology, and we like to play stump the adaptive policy expert. Okay. So, we want to circle back to your question? We'll answer the question here, right? I mean, it's almost an elephant in the room. Every time we talk about Catalyst switching becoming, Meraki switching, we have a lot of scared folks because there's a lot of love for Catalyst, but there's a lot of love for MS as well. The simple answer to is this the end of MS switching is it's a hard no. Absolutely not. To follow that up, I'll just be very clear that I'm also here to tell you about new Meraki switches as well, right? So we're going to try and put that to bed a little bit here with an introduction to the MS130 line. Okay, so brand new Meraki switches as well. This is our access layer switch. So this is an evolution to the MS100 series. So the 120s and 125s that we've had up until now and still do, by the way. This joins that lineup. Layer 2 non-stackable switch. So this is, it's ports and power, right? Anywhere you need, something to plug into, the MS130 is your workhorse, okay? They are available now. Just we started shipping in October, so this lineup is available now, absolutely. And when we start looking at this, we kind of kept, what was really great about the 120s and 125s, right? So we have both the compact, really versatile, small footprint switches there as well. Can't get rid of those, a personal favorite, as well as the 19-inch rack mount switches. So maybe to your point a little bit, Lindsay, about MGig, this has also been a big ask for a long time for non-Wi-Fi use cases, to be clear, to bring multi-gig into the access layer at a more affordable, point, right? So that's exactly what the 130 lineup is intended to do. And actually, I just remembered, I used to be a service provider, SE, before I joined product management. And one of the biggest use cases we had was that service providers really wanted a small switch because they're often doing managed services, right? They're sticking it in a closet somewhere in the back of Betty's cupcake shop. And they need just 1 or 2 MGig ports because they're bringing, gigabit to the premises, right? And as soon as you have only a gigabit port, but we want to sneak some voice over IP services in there, but we still need to give 1 gig, right? This is a very common ask. So the MS130 was a really popular one for them coming as well. Okay. So let's look at the compact switches first, right? We have had these forever. I love these switches. They're such a cool and versatile option, right? So 3 8-port models. And actually, we've got a brand new switch in this lineup today. So this is now joins what we had before with the 8 ports. We have a 12-port option. Another popular request is, just a little bit more, right? We'll see if 10 years down the road we end up having like a 16-port and a 20-port, but jokes aside, 12-port's been a common ask. The great thing about this is that not only does it have MGig, right, like one of the 8-port models, but it has the same footprint as the 8-port model. So we had lots of customers, like retail, for instance, where they stick this great compact switch underneath a cashier desk, right? It's those constrained spaces. And then they run out of ports, and their options before were either to get another 8-port switch, double the footprint, or go up to a rack mount switch, right? Which is double the footprint. So there are really no good options here. So a couple more ports, MGig, in the same exact footprints we had in the compact switches. This is a really nice addition to the lineup. We're seeing lots of, folks really wanting to get their hands on this one. Okay. We look at the rest of the portfolio.
One thing just back on that.
Sure.
It looks bigger in the picture, but you see they're actually the same size, those 8 and the 12s,
Yeah,
aren't
they are
Like, it looks
exactly.
bigger there, but it's
Yeah,
not.
yeah, it's in the same case, the exact same casing. So it is, I can tell you the exact same, because of course we wanted to, push it to the front a little bit and just like, hey, this is new and different. So optical illusion there. Either that or it's metric, measurements, make it look bigger. I love it. Thank you for laughing at that, by the way. Okay, I rely heavily on Canadian, jokes at times. Okay, so here's the whole lineup. Okay, I have a quick little walkthrough. A lot of this looks very familiar if you're familiar with the 120, 125s. We have these models with no kind of letter suffix on the end of them. Those don't have PoE. Oddly enough, we still have lots of demand for non-PoE switches. Sometimes that is surprising, but ports are still important too, right? And by the way, this is our highest volume switch. Like we sell hundreds of thousands of these a year. So, the compact ones in particular are great, for just about everything. The P suffix means, PoE plus, so 30 watts of PoE on those models as well. And now we have X model switches. And you've seen this maybe on some of the Catalyst line, some of our newer switches as well. For the MS100 series, the X is 10 gig SFP plus uplinks. Right? It's also the MGig variants that have a couple of 2.5 gigabit per second MGig ports. But there's this kind of note at the bottom there I'll point out as well. We talked a little bit about enabling adaptive policy on new platforms. We talked about the Catalyst 9300, right, from Meraki. But that story needs to extend to the access layer as well, right? So just understand that the X models are also the switches that have the hardware components in them, so that we can read and enforce the SGT tags in the future. Now, it's not available quite yet. We needed to ship the hardware first, and now we're moving our focus to getting the firmware ready to do it, but it's coming along soon. So if adaptive policy or SGT enforcement is something that you're interested in, just bear in mind that the X models for the access layer are what you want to keep your eye on. Okay?
That's only in the X line of the 130.
Only X, because there is a hardware component required, right, in order to be able to read that Cisco metadata header. So the slightly different hardware inside the switches than on the other models. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I'm going to call this the main event now. We've got new Meraki switches. We've got, arguably new Catalyst Meraki switches. But we have this question that comes out from time to time. So what if your space is a little rougher around the edges? I like to think that I know a little bit about networking in rough spaces. This is a great picture. As I mentioned earlier, I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is a little obscure for a lot of folks. Although Bruno, definitely knows where that is. He probably doesn't like it though. There's a healthy rivalry there between our cities. But what Saskatchewan as a whole is kind of known for is potash. Again, a little obscure, right? But it is. It's a mineral. We dig it out from underneath the earth, and it is a critical component for fertilizer. And so it grows crops and feeds the world. It's kind of like oil, but with a Western Canadian prairie twist. Again, very obscure. Suffice to say that my career, I spent like 15 years looking like this. This is a mining machine, by the way, called a boring machine. I always have to explain that because it's not boring. It's very interesting, but in this case, boring means doing rock out of the earth. But the story I'm trying to get to here is that I spent 15 years kind of looking around going, I think I took a wrong turn somewhere. This is not the data center I'm looking for. And then realizing that networks were, going everywhere. This is before IoT was like kind of a really popular buzzword. And even when that became a buzzword, it was like I'm connecting my fridge to the internet or my toaster. Whereas I'm going, I am in a hole in a very dark place, in a very dirty place. It's extremely hot, and I'm up to my arm in some sort of piece of equipment trying to plug an Ethernet cable into a switch, right? And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about all the places that networks go that aren't the IDF and aren't the data center. What we've heard from our customers as well is that they've had similar experiences. They've been using our switches nonetheless in all of these places, right? And so we have lots of customers, great stories, who said like, hey, we've been using these switches outside, the MS-120 compacts in particular, and they work great. They get frozen, they get very hot, and they continue to run, which is great. But they say, we understand that's really not what they were intended for. We've had customers go so far as to tell us very upfront that we actually cut the case open, take the board out, put it in an EMA enclosure to lock it up because it's a very tight, space that they want to put that switch into, and it works great. We understand that when we call into support, they may have questions about this, but for the most part, they work fine, and customers are okay with that. But the ask has consistently been, but could you consider making a switch that the datasheet says is okay to do this with? Now, I regret to tell you all that we are not going to allow you to cut your switch open and take the board out. That's still not going to be a supported use case, but I'm super excited to be introducing for the first time, and I'm really going to build suspense here while the slide loads. Oh, it was fast that time. This happens to me every time. So I want you all to say hello to our first Meraki cloud-managed, ruggedized switch. This is the MS-130R. Okay? Any guesses? R stands for really cold, or really, it stands for rugged, right? Makes sense, okay? Rugged is kind of a very wide term, okay? And it's that way on purpose, right? This is really about, for the access layer, filling out what I am kind of jokingly referring to as the three-legged stool now, right? We obviously had a use case we weren't addressing as well as customers wanted. They said, we're going to use a switch that's designed to go in a climate-controlled environment, and we're going to put it outside, or we're going to put it in dirty, space, and hope that our stool doesn't wobble over. And thankfully, if you stick a, compact switch underneath a short-legged stool, it mostly stands straight. But it was time maybe to build a purpose-built device for this use case. And so that's what we've done. While we wait for... so this is really about extending connectivity and power to wherever you need it. Now, I don't like to really pigeonhole use cases because, again, I've come from a place where people use things for all sorts of use cases I've never thought of. So if I say this is a perfect switch for your parking lot, I don't want to kind of shortchange the folks who are going to be like, oh no, I have a use case for this that I have no idea what you're thinking right now, right? And that's what we've seen so far. So IP30, right? It's a 30-watt PoE plus switch. The big thing to start with is extended operating temperature range. So I come from the cold part of Canada, the arguably very cold part of Canada. Minus 40 degrees Celsius was important for me, absolute requirement, all the way up to plus 70 degrees Celsius. Okay, again, I go Celsius first, right? I'm excited to have people on the call at least who know what I'm talking about because it's usually underappreciated. But that's 40 below Fahrenheit as well, up to 158. Okay. The next thing beyond the extended operating temperature range is that we wanted to concentrate on really, again, having flexibility for things like mounting and power. So again, you can use it for whatever your imagination comes up with within some pretty wide parameters. And ultimately, it is still a Meraki switch. It is an MS-130 after all. It's what we called it for that reason. So it's going to look from the dashboard perspective just like any other Meraki switch, any other MS switch. So we've actually got 2 new MS platforms there, right? We're not killing off anything today. Okay. I'll look a little bit in detail at these flexible deployment options, starting with mounting and power supplies. On the mounting side, this is our first time we have a DIN rail mount switch. How many folks are familiar with DIN rail? Okay, it's good. It's obviously way more common than it used to be 15 years ago when I was like, what's a DIN rail? And I don't know about y'all, but I get in that situation where if I hear an acronym, I actually can't sleep at night unless I know what the acronym stands for, which is a real problem when you find out, though, we just named something, DIN, and it doesn't actually mean anything. But yeah, so we sell these all the time. For those who aren't familiar, this is pretty common in industrial cabinets or electrical, cabinets at the side of the road. Cabinets that don't tend to open on the sides and back like an IT rack, right? And so the important thing there is to stick the ports up at you when you open the door, which is often, leaning over a ledge or into a hole, right? Easy accessibility. So that will come with the switch when it ships, as well as the wall mount and rack mount brackets all in the box. You can choose what was going to work best for you to get this sucker attached or mounted or hung wherever it needs to go for whatever you're using it for. On a similar but different note, on the power supply options, we have several options. So we have an AC adapter for the switch as well. This will not ship with the switch, okay? This is more of like e-waste thing. You may be familiar with what we do with power cords. Similar thing, if you're not going to use the AC adapter, we don't want to ship one to you and then find out there's a pile of them in your warehouse later gathering dust. So this is a situation where we're going to expect you to tell us which power supply you want when you order it, and order that one as well to avoid waste. But what we're also doing here is leveraging Cisco's established hardware base, right? They've already got DIN rail mount power supplies. And they're great products. The industrial Ethernet portfolio is a fantastic, a whole portfolio that I leverage extensively, down in that dark hole that you saw earlier. And so it's like, why would we make our own when we've got these right here that our partners have available for you? So those are going to be supported as well. And you're going to actually see more of this, more of us supporting Cisco components with the Meraki switches as we get closer together. So you'll just choose whichever one works for your use case at the time that you order the switch.
DC power?
Yeah, well, so technically it's all DC power, right?
Yeah.
The switch takes a DC input, right? The AC adapter, of course, will convert for you. Those DIN rail power supplies will take AC or DC power in, of course, and then field wire directly to the switch. I'll show you a close-up picture in a minute there as well. I will note before I forget, though, that the AC adapter also extended operating temperature range, right? So we'll cold start the switch at 40 below and then handle all the way up to 70 above as well.
Just one thing on the power adapters and the rack mount kit there. Those brick wall wart type things are horrible things to, like, if I put that switch in a rack,
Yeah.
and I've got my rack mount there, I've got my switches there, and then I've got this stupid,
And it's giant, right?
like, is there,
It's like
so
a
what,
second switch.
so what some other products do where they have this like a narrow wood thing,
Yep.
they then have another little piece on the rack mount kit that's designed for that power adapter.
Yeah, I know
Is
what you're
is
talking
there
about.
anything like that?
Or
Or is it just me
yes
just kind of
and
dangle
no.
down the side of my rack, and hopefully there's some other device underneath?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what I'll say is on a wall mount, we're very purposefully working on a bracket to mount.
I guess the wall mount's the same thing as well. Yeah, I'd like to have that sort of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the same thing. We have those MSPs again who stick in the switch on a wall. That we've had the integrated bracket on for years in the back of, I think I said Betty's Cupcake Shop or whatever. And then they've got the adapter that's almost as
Duct
big as
tape
the
to the
switch,
thing or
right?
whatever, right?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously we find it's a 300-watt adapter, so it's a bit sizable. But this is again about flexibility. So we are working on a bracket to allow you to mount this bracket or this adapter and a bunch of our other adapters as well. So for like the MX firewalls and some of the other brackets for the switches. We've opted in this case, I think, to rely on our third-party friends to work on things like enclosures and the rack mount stuff in particular. And I think I can't think of the name, but there are some really great option vendors who make those purpose-built rack mount kits as well. Yeah. Okay, what are we talking about next? So this is Meraki's first ruggedized switch. As I've hinted at a little bit. Cisco, we have these great partners there who know industrial Ethernet switching and those rugged environments, through and through. We did, of course, rigorous testing with our manufacturing partners. They put this switch into, I don't remember what the actual name is, but chambers that they can ramp the temperature all the way up to 70 and down to minus 40 as well, powered the switch full load of PoE to make sure everything on paper worked the way it was supposed to. And, you know, I can say thankfully that it does. But that's kind of boring and not as much fun as, you know, testing ourselves, right? And as you can imagine, Meraki, we've never had a ruggedized switch before. We had an upswell of people raising their hand and say, "Ooh, I'll test this out for you," right? So we thought it'd be fun to kind of look at some of the things we did. I joke that, you know, even today, while some of us do have 19-inch rack mounts at home, what all of us have are garages and attics and you know, sheds, and so there was lots of people willing to volunteer. This is actually one of my installations. This is at my cabin at the lake. We have a shed, and I decided I wanted to put a camera up there and watch the wildlife go by in the dead of winter. We're waiting for the slide to advance because I got to tell a joke here. Oh, hey, Jordan, you got a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are
You want
those?
to back up?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Are those?
Are you gonna go over some of the power requirements for?
Yeah. In fact, we'll go in
rods.
depth, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Is we had a bunch of people learning some new things, and I thought we'd share a little bit about how, you know, we went through that process. There's some fun stuff here. I'll just start with this. This is Doug, by the way. I named my switch Doug. This is a great joke because this is my in-laws' cabin at the lake, and so my father-in-law's name is Doug, and so I took this picture to show our folks internally where I was putting the switch, and it happened to have this, you know, welcome to Doug and Carol's cabin, and so now I named my switch Doug, and we have all sorts of jokes about making Doug sleep in the shed, you know, so it's a great. He'll never watch this, but okay. Okay. What I did catch though, and I think I got to hit play on the thing, you know, so it's not winter. We ended up doing beta testing in the summer, which is kind of a disappointment. It didn't get really hot in Saskatchewan. It's funny because the video is playing for me, of course, on the small screen. Okay. So I didn't get to test in the winter. I'm looking forward to, like, you know, seeing how that goes. Of course, I have lots of confidence. I did, however, you know, have some success. We're going to call this a win, and realizing that deer can absolutely walk on two legs and steal bird feed from you. So, you know, we'll call this a success. The bird, and he does it twice, just to be clear. He gets down and you kind of go, "Did I see that?" And he stands up again and steals more bird feed. So, again, you know, unique use cases wherever you want to put ports and power, right? There we go. So let's talk a little bit about, in this case, powering. We'll start with field wiring. This is the first time that a lot of our Meraki folks, our QA teams internally, have used in-rail power supplies. And so it made sense that we said, hey, you know, it absolutely makes sense that we put these in the test bed. Our hardware folks have, you know, confirmed and validated that everything works as expected. We've designed it to do so. But on an ongoing state, we need to have these in our QA test beds and have switches running off of them. So if you can imagine yourself or myself sitting in San Francisco teaching a bunch of QA engineers how to strip wire and connect them to the switches, there were a few raised eyebrows, kind of like, hey, you know, do we need to call facilities for this? And it's like, technically, yes. To be clear, only trained and qualified personnel should be installing or operating, you know, any sort of equipment, you know, working with electricity, right? When I worked in the mining industry, you know, we had electricians, you know, doing this, but it's important for you to understand, you know, how customers actually install things. So we got right to work on that, and we have these running in our test beds now as well. And one of the things we also encountered was this idea of, okay, you know, we have what critical temperature alerts. We've had those in dashboard forever, right? Our switches that operate in you know, IT closets run at normal operating temperatures, and if they get too hot, we send an alert saying your switch is getting hot, you know, see what's going on in your IDF. And so this is arguably more important than ever on a switch designed to get, you know, extremely hot and is likely to be in a remote location, right? So when we coded the firmware to, you know, adapt itself for the extended operating temperature range of the 130R, it was very important. We say we need everybody to try and get their switches as hot as possible and make sure everything works as expected. And some people take these kind of challenges very seriously. So we had a bit of a challenge. We, you know, gave somebody, you know, some sort of prize, gift certificate for being the first to reach 70 degrees and fire the critical temperature alert on the MS-130R. And this one enterprising fellow in particular created an oven essentially by insulating some containers and putting a switch in there. You'll see that's an MT temperature sensor with a probe in it as well, so we can measure the ambient temperature and we can understand the delta between like ambient temperature and the switch's internal temperature, right? Because of course, what the switch is using is actually how hot am I inside. But on the data sheet, we're saying, well, we support the switch running up to 70 degrees ambient, right? So we have to understand that things are working as expected. So this fellow created as much heat as possible, found a bunch of other Meraki devices that get a little warm if you run them close to each other and on top of each other. There we go, with that temperature sensor on top, and was the first successful fellow to hit 70 degrees and fire the critical temperature alert. And of course, in this situation, right, when we fire that critical temperature alert again, we're running at about 90 degrees Celsius in the switch, right? It's around the threshold for most industrial or standard operating temperature switches, right, to kind of let you know that it's getting warm, but there's no damage happening to the switch yet, right? So the advanced warning. And that may be 70 ambient, or it may vary a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about that here as well. A couple other fun things that we saw, though, we did have some folks try to test on the cold end as well as sticking a switch out on their patio in the middle of the summer heat underneath a Rubbermaid container to get it hot. In this case, again, folks take things very seriously, put a temperature sensor in the freezer as well. I don't know if you know this, but consumer grade freezers not really designed to have something generating heat inside of them. And unfortunately, we did have to sacrifice some ice cream in one particular case. But the switch worked really well if the ice cream didn't survive. Okay. On a more serious note, of course, we had lots of folks testing in what we'll say are more traditional ways for our switch in hot and cold and tight space environments here. So, there's some environments are, tighter than others, and we got some great examples here of, some folks who did very professional looking installation with the DIN rail power supply running 2 switches at once, right? Cameras and temperature sensors in there to get good data about how that switch is working. Again, that delta between what's the ambient temperature in a non-ventilated box versus what the switch is actually seeing as temperature. And this is a great example of things like, if you don't think about it, it's kind of interesting. The power supply obviously generates heat, right? And so what you can do is generate heat enough in the power supply to heat up the switch, and suddenly you get critical temperature alerts when the ambient temperature is more like 60, and you're going like, what's going on here? So this is a great example of seeing, like, if this box had been ventilated, you would see like the switch on the upstream side of the power supply would not fire critical temperature alerts while the one downstream might, right? Because the heat's getting pushed towards the one switch and not the other. This second picture is actually our friend Alex's here's house, a very nice example of a pretty confined space with more DIN rail and temperature sensor in there. And of course, lots of testing in these very dirty environments where, it's still a good idea to put things in a box, which is very common, right? So
to speak to the use case here, are you seeing a number of your industrial customers that are leveraging Meraki switches in the Meraki platform outside of their industrial environments, and that's why you created the MS130R? Because, there is a Catalyst line of ruggedized switches already. So is that why you created the MS130R? Because those customers already leverage Meraki outside of the industrial?
Yeah, that's really how we're explaining the use case. That's very apt. Is that as you mentioned, like Cisco makes great solutions for very industrial use cases, right? Switches that I again grew up on and very fond of, that do like crazy things in really harsh environments and have features like precision time protocol and support for those control protocols like Modbus and Ethernet IP, right? That is a very specialized use case in a lot of cases, right? And we are not in any way, shape, or form replacing, those switches, right? Those, nobody does it better than they do, right? I'm a big fan. And so this is very much, like you said, we have these, especially Meraki customers who have Meraki switches already. I'm going like, either I am using it outdoors, or I would really love to have one. I want to have that same experience, right, in the Meraki dashboard all in one place, but have the data sheet say that it's okay for me to use it outdoors. It's okay for it to get dirty and things like that. And it's about choice, kind of like the Catalyst Meraki 9300, right? It's about having, like, meeting customers where they are is something we often talk about, which is really about having flexibility to choose something that fits really well for your use case, right? So more options. Yes.
You talked, this is Micheline Murphy. You talked about temperature a lot in small spaces and dirty. What about vibration? Like if I wanted to put it on my boat or in my van or
Okay.
on a vehicle.
I want to hear all about your boat use case later. What I'll say is, so there is no accommodation for vibration on this switch. There are a couple of other things that I'll show, I think, on the next slide even, so I'll just advance while we're talking. But you know what, it's funny, we hear this vibration use case a lot, and we've heard it for years and years and years. Again, we do have customers that do it anyways, right, and are perfectly fine, which is great. But I do particularly find, and we kind of think that tends, and I'll say tends, of course, because we can't pigeonhole anything, but that tends to be a little bit better suited, we find, of a use case for like an MX firewall, right? Because it's usually an edge device. And MXs have a great, platform for, 8 to 10 ports, but also have the firewall and the cellular and all that things. So I normally sneakily kind of redirect that question to the MX team because it's somebody else. But yeah, jokes aside, it is also a situation like I'm not taking anything off the table, but we have to start somewhere, right? And so we kind of aimed here to hit that wide middle swath of, it's not an IT closet, but it should work for a lot of everything in the middle, right? And so there's no accommodation specifically for vibration here. Okay. Yes, Jordan.
So when I look at these switches, I'm thinking of like the IE4000s in the regular Cisco lineup, the more industrialized, ruggedized switches. I know those switches run like more limited, more restricted firmware, so that there just aren't as many, services running, just different things like that to help it be a more solid platform.
Yeah.
And then is there like a stripped down firmware that's going in here to kind of mirror that we want this not to just be a rugged hardware, but a more stable software as well? Or is this, we're just really kind of saying, hey, if you got a hot space and a cold space and you like Meraki, this is more that fit.
Yeah, so I would say you're right on the latter. Again, we didn't set out here to kind of do a Meraki IE switch.
Mm-hmm.
So like those guys, nobody does it better than they do.
Right.
And so for those specialized use cases, every single time we'll defer to them.
Yeah.
This is very much like the customers who love the Meraki switching, and we just wish you would put it outside. So it is very focused on hardware accommodation. The firmware is exactly the same as the MS-130. So there's no difference there. And that was intentional. It was, we want it to look and behave like a Meraki switch in the Meraki dashboard.
So I can't turn off spanning tree on one of these and turn on rep ring.
No, there's no rep. Yeah, no, as I said, precision time protocol is one of the ones I refer to often, but rep is usually the other one I refer to most times.
Yeah.
It's, we don't have a lot of customers asking for rep, I'll be straight. We see it all the time in industrial, right? It's very common there, but we say, like, guys, like we're not here to replace your IE switching. Like those guys are, good friends of ours, and again, I'm a big fan. I use those switches for years. They are better suited for this.
Okay.
And that's really kind of the answer there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
At least for now, right?
Yeah.
We gotta start somewhere. Yes, Jay.
So just to kind of bring this back to your beginning of your presentation, are there any plans or any talks about
So many plans.
converting IE switches into Meraki?
Oh my God, I would love that. Wouldn't that be amazing? Like I said, big fan, right? I came from there. So for me to be coming into Meraki and then saying like, hey, we're building a ruggedized switch, I kind of went, yes. And I think, an IE switch in dashboard would kind of be the culmination of that. Again, we've got to start somewhere. So this is where we're starting. And we have all kinds of plans for the future. As you can see, we're adding more switches, more Catalyst switches to dashboard. But time, money, people. It's hard to find really great developers. So this is where we're at today. I'm not ruling anything off. We are absolutely having those discussions internally and saying like, could we bring IE switching into Meraki dashboard? Maybe. We're just not there on the journey yet. Okay. I want to get into a little bit more of the details here. Well, before we run out of time on the 130R in particular, so let's have a quick peek. So again, we talked about the DIN rail, the multiple ways of powering the switch, terminal block adapter there for DIN rail power supplies, the AC adapter as well. Direct grounding on the switch, right? To be able to ground the switch so that you can protect it there, as well as surge protection, higher end surge protection on the front side on the Ethernet ports, right? So much higher than a typical IDF switch than we see there for protection outdoors, and a few other little kind of Easter eggs here, like magnetic field immunity, voltage dips immunity, and specifications for the traffic signaling systems, right? So it's another good to your point about like IE switching. If you look at an IE switch datasheet, the amount of certifications that thing has are about this long. We did a couple. We said we want to hit some big things. Again, what we've seen customers asking for. I just want to take my existing Meraki switch and slap it outdoors or in a box, right? But we're not boiling the ocean, at least yet. Okay. Go to the next one. This is a little bit of the detailed specs that you'll see on the data sheet here. It's just a couple of things I want to call out. So, 8 gigabit ports with 2 SFP plus port uplinks there, 240 watts of PoE, so 30 watts across all ports with a maximum of 240 watts. There are some caveats there when you get into the extended operating temperature range, which I will give you some details on here shortly. But I do also want to call out that, like the power supplies, we are supporting Cisco's ruggedized SFPs as well. Again, no point in reinventing the wheel here. You guys have got hardware that works already in the extended operating temperature range. We qualified those and said, well, you can use those on this switch as well, right? Yes.
Remington Luce, sorry, I may be preempting something you're going to show in a second. That says SFP plus, which generally, if I recall correctly, is 10 gig capacity, but you only have 1 gig SFPs in that display. Do you support 10 gig SFPs off of that? Second question is, does this do adaptive policy?
Yeah, 2 great questions. Okay, so those are 10 gig ports. There are some limitations, again, around how hot you can run the switch with 10 gig. And we're starting to add heat generating devices into the switch. So what the datasheet will say is that we will support 10 gigabit SFPs, but you're kind of limited to the temperature range either of the SFP, or we'll specify that you may not be able to get right up to 70 degrees Celsius, for instance, or 158 with those 10 gig SFPs in there as well. Yeah. So this is kind of the theme you're going to see in the next few slides, is that when we start doing these extended operating temperatures, and particularly on the hot side, there's a lot of asterisks that you need to be aware of versus so on the operating temperature is a great example here, where normally we say, the switch will operate up to, 30 or 40 degrees Celsius, normal climate control temperature range, and everything is static. The PoE budget is static, the power supply wattage is static, the SFPs all work in those range, and you can kind of fire and forget. As soon as you get onto the hot end of the switches, everything starts to kind of go, okay, well, you need to balance the thermal load a little bit, actually is what it is. So you'll see this is very common on industrial switches as well, as this kind of use case example for operating temperature. So the switch will absolutely, run up to 70 degrees in a controlled environment in a test bed with full PoE load, right, with proper ventilation. But if you stick that switch on its side and cover up the holes, you may see that critical temperature alert fire before you hit 70 and go, what's going on here? So what we're aiming to do is to give you the context to say, like, hey, if you want to get the right, on the edge of what this, device can do, you need to know a few things. And that is, mount the switch vertically so that the heat can go out the holes, right? And ventilate it, 200 linear feet per minute, and you should be able to get up to 70. But this is just information for your use, right? Rather than kind of making you guess at it, we're giving you more information to make an educated decision about how you want to deploy this sucker, right? Okay. Similarly, on the PoE budgeting side,
the least technical question you're going to get, Brendan,
Hey,
is there, do you provide something simple like dust caps for unused ports, and then, or do we use duct tape to?
It's a great question.
And does something like that, does port density, how many are used, things like that, change the temperature profile at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Bruno. So this is an IP30 switch is really what it is, right? So if you're familiar with IP ratings, right, the first number means ingress protection against particulate matter or physical objects, and the second number is ingress protection against liquids, basically. So there's a 0 there on the second way. You can't turn a hose onto this sucker. It is very much, you guys laugh, but I've been in environments where there were hoses turned on switches. So this is very much intended, Bruno, to be in an enclosure. What I did find quite consistently in the field, and of course there's always exceptions, was though that a lot of customers, if there was a forklift around, like a fiber-seeking, forklift or other, dangerous environments, a lot of customers preferred to spend $30 or $100 on a NEMA enclosure and stick the APE or the switch in that box and ram into the NEMA enclosure and replace that, than replacing the switch. In particular, potash was a great example where like the salt is so corrosive that even like a highly sealed, ruggedized metal AP is going to slowly get eaten away. Better to, sacrifice the plastic box and the device inside. So I tell that story a lot. The simple answer to the question is, we're suggesting that the switch goes in a box if you're trying to really seal it against that. And of course, there are great options for like having ventilation in those boxes and integrated power systems as well. Okay. So this is the first time that we have a power supply with multiple wattage power supplies outside of an IT closet, of course, right? And so this should be kind of familiar to most people. The math doesn't always work out if you have a lower wattage power supply, right? If you actually want to power 8 devices at 30 watts. Now, most of us know as well that most devices don't actually draw 30 watts. So I think we've made out really well here, but the math simply doesn't work out, right? And again, we're going to provide this information in the data sheet so you know what the draws are of the switch and stuff as well, and can say, if I'm trying to power 8 devices in a DIN rail type environment, I might need the 480 watt power supply for the math to work out, okay? But this also gets into more than just the math, and we get into the concept of derating. And again, if you've worked in these environments before, this may be familiar, but a lot of our folks have not heard of this concept before. So it's kind of fun to kind of take a moment. What you do tend to see on data sheets for things like the industrial Ethernet power supplies is the derating curves, right? And this is just a simple saying that, hey, when that power supply gets really hot, it will not provide 480 watts of power anymore, right? It's a safety thing. It prevents the switch from bursting into flames, right, at those high temperatures. So more information that will be added to our data sheets, but this is what the equations look like. And basically, right, you're just getting to situations where, again, it's hard to power 8 devices, pull 240 watts from a power supply that is getting extremely hot. But we've worked out very well here. Like we can clearly power 8 devices on all ports at 15 watts all day long. We start to get tight on those lower end power supplies. Yeah. I always love these. So the derating curves seem like something that should be much more complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. We say, for every 5 degrees over 45, you lose 24 watts. Pretty simple to understand. Yeah. Okay. So looking forward here, as we're building, these new use cases and switches that have a lot more considerations for deployment for things like temperature and powering, we're starting to think about how do we provide more information to you guys beyond like the data sheet information and the math for like understanding what that switch is seeing for its installation environment, right? So taking a moment to just look at some of the things we're trying to do in dashboard is things like this idea of expanded switch health information. So this is, of course, subject to change. This is something we're working on and hasn't been released yet, so it may look a little bit different when we finally release, but we're looking at things like adapting what's today the power tab that tells you about your power supplies and providing more expanded health information. So environmental information like your CPU and memory utilization in dashboard, but doing that in a Meraki way. So one of the things that we've always done well is give you historical information to benchmark with, right? Whereas I can go into any Catalyst switch at the command line and ask how hot are you now, and I can write that down on a spreadsheet and keep track over time. But it's always been really hard to do benchmarking, and Meraki has done that really well. So you'll see things here like those graphs saying like, well, today your switch is hotter than last week, or the CPU is running, harder than it was last week. Similarly with the temperature and the fan information there, so that you're not just looking at how fast the fan is going, but you're going like, hey, this is really out of the norm for this device, right? Because maybe you're running in a hot environment anyways. So we're looking forward to bringing a whole bunch more information like this that'll serve the MS-130 and the rest, or MS-130R, pardon me, and the rest of our portfolio really well as we go forward. Okay. One more, this is kind of logistical housekeeping stuff. This is also the first time with the MS-130 and 130R that we're going to a bit of a simplified licensing model. So if you've been familiar with ordering Meraki licensing before, particularly on the switch side, we've typically had licenses specific to the exact model of switch, like a 24P versus a 24, right? So what we're doing here is moving to a bit more of a t-shirt sizing, small, medium, and large, a little more flexibility, a little simpler. But of course, every time we change something, that gets a little confusing at first, right? So feel free to ask me questions after as you have, but understand that we've got kind of a compact license now that covers the 8s and the 12 ports and the MS130R, same license for all three. And then a license for the 24 port models and a license for the 48 port models. So t-shirt sizing is one of the things you'll hear us, maybe refer to here as small, medium, large type approach as well. And you'll see this, I think, starting to show up in more products as we refresh lineups as well. Okay. So that's the MS130 lineup, including the MS130R. This is now like a really great, rounding out of that portfolio, right? We've got this high density switch in the rack mounts where you need, high numbers of ports with MGig as well in the closets in particular. A great refresh as well, adding MGig to that distributed versatile compact switch. And now, personally, I'm most excited about the MS130R for all of those weird use cases. Please, by all means, tell me later if you have some use cases for this switch that I may not have thought of. I'd love to see all of those as well. That's the MS130.
One more question.
Yes. Okay.
Can you stack the $130?
No. Yeah. Again, starting somewhere. It's just a small switch that again, what you'll hear me talk about lots is hot, cold, and tight spaces. And tight spaces tends to be one of the things that kind of discounts things like redundant power or stacking in most cases, because then your footprint starts to expand, right? Yeah. Our focus there was on getting it tight. In fact, it's our smallest switch, right? By volume, it's very similar to like an 8LP, the like 128 LP, but it's actually our smallest switch. So that was our focus there, was trying to get it into constrained space environments, which at least for now, discounted stacking. Yeah. Okay. So quick recap, Catalyst Meraki 9300, that starts shipping here in mid-November with those fiber aggregation switches coming early next year. The MS130 lineup is shipping now, so we're getting great feedback on that platform already. And the 130R starting to ship here in November as well, so coming very soon. It will be in your hands in the near term. Okay, so I hope we answered that question. Again, we're waiting for the slide to advance, but that question, is this the end of MS switching? And no, like absolutely not. Really, we think of this as more like it's new beginnings. It's an evolution, right? Not only are we leveraging the best of the Cisco portfolio, hopefully in a way that does it justice as well with our strengths, but we're building new switches for those customers who want them as well.
So I'd like to go back to the Catalyst 9300 platform and talk about conversions. So let's say you have an enterprise customer that has a mix of Meraki and traditional Catalyst running iOS XE. Maybe they don't have Catalyst Center and they want to be able to make their Catalyst 9300 environment in their larger buildings like Meraki. What does that conversion process look like for customers that already have 9300s and want to make them managed in
Put them in Meraki managed mode? Yeah. It's really quite straightforward. So like at the CLI, it's basically a quick parser command to say enable Meraki mode. And it will then return to you a Meraki serial number. So it makes a call out, to our systems and generates a serial number that it gives to you so that you can claim it in dashboard. Once you have that, you can claim it in a dashboard away from the switch, and you come back to the switch and say, okay, go. One more command to convert the switch. It'll reboot there, come back up, connect to dashboard, and download the config that you set for it based on that serial number.
Okay.
It's super straightforward, yeah.
Is that in every code train?
No, it started, oh goodness, 17.9. So I forget the exact number. We have an onboarding guide on the website I can point you to, and so minimum version required there. But the parsers and the code have been built in around there and going forward.